Hello, I'm Jasper Smith, Executive Editor for Commentary at Tax Notes. I'm here with Alex Zhang, the winner of the 2020 Tax Analyst Christopher E. Bergen Award for Excellence in Writing. Alex's paper, titled The State and Local Tax Deduction and Fiscal Federalism, argued that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act's limit on the SALT deduction undermined the deduction's effectiveness, thus underscoring the inherent defects and obstacles in advancing federalism with the tax measure. So that was a bit of a mouthful, but it was an excellent paper, and hopefully by now everybody has gotten a chance to read it. And if you haven't, certainly check it out. So as far as Alex, he's currently pursuing his JD at Yale Law School and will graduate next year. He's graciously agreed to join us from his home in Connecticut to answer some questions about his experience with the competition. So welcome, Alex.
Hi, Jasper. Thanks so much for the invitation and for having me. I'm excited to answer your questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much for taking the time out of what I'm sure is a busy schedule at this time of year to come and answer those questions. So to get us started, first off, can you give us a brief overview of your paper?
Of course, my paper is on the state and local tax deduction. So there's been a lot of academic commentary and also policy debate about whether state and local taxes should be deductible. And that commentary has primarily focused on the revenue side of things. For example, whether taxes fund benefits and services that would count as consumption, whether an uncapped deduction would be regressive, also issues of horizontal equity and the lost revenues from the deduction. And my paper really looks at this deduction from more of an expenditure perspective. Basically asks, given these various arguments for and against deductibility from the revenue side, is there a reason to keep the state and local tax deduction because federal expenditures are distributed so unevenly across the states? And my answer there is really a qualified yes. The paper estimates the SALT tax expenditure for each state and then compares that with the distribution of federal spending in each state. It then concludes that the SALT deduction was a somewhat effective but imperfect mechanism of mitigating the uneven distribution of federal spending, and also that the TCJA's cap on the SALT deduction really undermined this effectiveness. The paper also underscores this difficulty of effectuating fiscal federalism through a tax measure. So it ends by calling for a more balanced distribution of federal spending across the states.
What led you to submit this paper to our student writing competition?
Yeah, so I've been very lucky to have two really fantastic mentors in tax law at Yale Law School, Professors Michael Gratz and Ann Alstott. Both of them encouraged me to submit to Tax Notes. And I think both of them were authors at Tax Notes. So that's how I found out about the student writing competition and submitted.
Excellent. Well, we certainly appreciate that, and we are familiar with both of them. We've worked with them many times over the years. So taking a step back, you talked about what you covered in the article, and it was what many might say is a very deep dive into SALT tax, especially for, I guess at the time, maybe a second year law student, right? So how did you select your topic for that paper?
Yeah, I was really fascinated by the political debate that was happening around the 2017 tax legislation about either getting rid of or capping the SALT deduction. And then there was also the subsequent litigation filed by several states, including New York and Connecticut as well, against the Treasury for violating the federalism provisions of the Constitution in capping the SALT deduction. So it was really an interesting mix of taxes, politics, fairness, and also constitutional federalism issues that I found just super interesting. I think at the time, a lot of people thought that the limit on the SALT deduction was politically aimed at Democratic-leaning states, which had high state and local taxes and were the primary beneficiaries of that deduction. And then some scholars and policymakers were also sort of making a fairness argument that we should get rid of the deduction. But then I thought, how can we think about fairness in taxation if we don't look at the spending that the taxes are funding? Um, So there was this pattern that the beneficiaries of the SALT deduction also received lower federal spending. So I wanted to sort of like see if empirically the SALT deduction was an effective way to mitigate the imbalance or the unfairness, if you will, in spending. So that was really the genesis of that paper.
Yeah, excellent. And we certainly commend you for picking a topic like that. Certainly, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was historical in many ways, and you honed right in on some of the major issues. Again, very commendable for a law student in particular, and then to write so thoroughly on it. We certainly appreciate that. So, to get to that level of paper, can you tell us a little bit about your drafting process?
Yeah, so I started the drafting process by looking at previous scholarship and what other tax scholars and lawyers have said about the SALT deduction, and also their views more generally sort of on the relationship between taxes and federalism. But when it came to the more empirical aspects of the paper, I relied quite a bit on the IRS statistics of income database, and I really appreciate the help of a few IRS officials who guided me through some of the public data that the service had for testing my thesis. And then I wrote the bulk of the paper around the final exam period during the fall semester. So I revised it a little bit the next semester too and added a little bit of material. And Professor Gratz was super helpful throughout the writing process too. Since I initially wrote this paper for a seminar that he taught on the history of the income tax.
What type of help were you able to get from Professor Gratz throughout the process? Did he just proofread, or did he kind of guide you along in your thesis?
Yeah, he gave me a lot of more substantive help on my idea and on my thesis. He gave me very helpful feedback throughout the process and also directed me to the IRS database where I found the data for the project. He gave me some really helpful comments on the paper after I completed writing it, so I knew how to structure my revision. And also, I didn't work with Professor Allstott as much on this project, but we had a conversation about fiscal federalism that was very helpful early on in structuring my thesis. I then took a seminar on tax policy with Professor Allstott, and I did a presentation on the SALT deduction. So that was really helpful to hear from both her and also the audience about their reactions to my ideas.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's great, obviously, that you were able to establish this professional relationship with not one, but two fantastic professors. And it sounds like they were extremely helpful in many ways. So I'm sure that a piece of advice you would give to future entrants maybe would be work with your professors. But would you have any other advice for those who might be thinking about submitting papers next year or in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I would definitely recommend getting to know and taking some time, to get to know the faculty mentors at your law school. I think that was super helpful for me, and I really appreciate the help that I got from my faculty mentors. In addition to that, I have maybe two pieces of advice. I would recommend carving some time in law school to write. Law school is really busy, and we always have exams or law journal work around the corner. And sometimes we neglect to write about the ideas that we actually are really excited about. But I think that law students can really make a contribution to existing scholarship if they just carve out some time and write and develop their own ideas. And then second, I also think it's important for students to have confidence in themselves and in their writings. When Professor Gratz and Allstott initially suggested that I submit my papers for publication, I honestly thought that they couldn't be serious because I just didn't think that my ideas were good enough. But they really gave me that confidence to revise my writings and then submit them. So sort of circling back, it's important to cultivate and develop relationship with faculty mentors.
Yeah, fantastic advice, Alex. And I think there's nothing wrong with some confidence and a dose of humility as well. That certainly can go a long way in any avenue. So for you, what are your plans? What's next for Alex after graduation? Do you have career goals? You want to do more writing in the future?
Yeah, I'm planning to clerk for two federal judges after graduation, one on the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco, and then I'll move back to New Haven in Connecticut to clerk on the Second Circuit. And after that, I'll probably work at a law firm and practice tax. I think in the long run, I really wouldn't mind teaching in law school as a professor. In terms of future writing, I have a piece forthcoming from a law review on using tax institutions to subsidize a national paid sick leave mandate. And that's really a project that came out of some of the policy failures in dealing with the current pandemic. So I'll be spending a little bit of time to edit that article before it comes out. And yeah, so I've also been spending a little bit of time thinking about the Supreme Court case on Bob Jones and sort of the issue of tax exemption for entities that violate anti-discrimination norms. So maybe I'll find some time to pull a piece together on that topic at some point too.
That sounds like you're very ambitious, but yeah, honestly, we cannot encourage you more when it comes to that. I think the more you write, obviously, the more you explore it, the better you'll get at it, and it'll just, again, you'll be adding some pieces to the world that I'm sure everybody will appreciate. So, Alex, again, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We certainly wish you the best in your career goals as it comes to tax. We hope we can work with you again down the road to work with some pieces. If you ever need anything from us, please feel free to reach out.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and also work with the Tax Notes team on the article.
And for all of our listeners, you can find and read Alex's full article online at taxnotes.com.